PW1 first claimed that there was no bounty, that he did not commit the murder for money. He did it under duress to magically change the story. They realized what he was saying was cap, probably when the SSI removed the allegation that Diddy actually paid the bounty.
I've said quite a few times on this channel that I personally think, in my personal, honest, own, personal, just me, not trying to get sued opinion, is that Lil Durk is perhaps cooked. He is perhaps overly cooked. He's perhaps grilled, charbroiled perhaps, but realistically a lot of people think that I'm capping. A lot of people think I've got the wrong opinion.
Lil Durk isn't just fighting a case anymore. He's walking into a courtroom where the main witness's story is falling apart like a cheap wig in a hurricane. Fresh legal documents just dropped, and they expose something the internet was not ready for. The government star. Witness allegedly can't keep his story straight. First, he says there was no bounty, no money, no murder for hire. Just I was under pressure. Then, suddenly, like a messy plot twist in a low-budget Netflix crime show, he's talking about payouts, bounties, and people staying behind in LA to collect the bag. And the wildest part? The government quietly edited their own script. That whole Durk paid the bounty angle magically disappears between indictments like it never existed. Now Durk's lawyers are basically stepping into court like, if this man is your strongest witness, I'd hate to see your weakest. So what happens when this witness, with stories flipping more than a gymnast, has to sit in that courtroom, stare across the room, and face the same man he helped turn into a headline? Because if Lil Durk really confronts the main witness in court, that's not just testimony. That's a live collision between truth, pressure, and pure legal chaos. From the moment these new court documents dropped, the internet reacted like someone just leaked the final episode of a crime series. People weren't whispering. They weren't speculating. They were sprinting to their phones with screenshots, red circles. And conspiracy boards like this was the hip-hop version of True Detective. Because what the paperwork revealed wasn't just interesting, it was explosive. It shook the entire narrative prosecutors built against Lil Durk. And suddenly, millions of people realized the main witness might be the weakest link in the whole case. The star witness, known only as PW1, was supposed to be the government's golden boy. The credible source, the insider, the person who saw, heard, and knew everything. But according to these filings, PW1's story was wobbling like an IKEA table missing screws. At first, he apparently insisted that there was no bounty involved, no payoff, no murder for hire scheme. He said he didn't kill for money. He said he acted under duress. That's already a dramatic claim. Almost sympathetic, like he was forced into the situation. But then something strange happened, something suspicious, something that Durk's lawyers circled in red ink like a teacher correcting a failing exam. This witness suddenly began singing a new song, adding fresh details, and changing his story like he was rehearsing different versions to see which one sounded better. All of a sudden, he's talking about bounty money, payouts, and people staying behind in Los Angeles to collect the bag. When exactly did this bonus chapter get unlocked? Because it definitely wasn't in the original draft, and that's not even the craziest part. After PW1 started shifting his testimony like a broken radio signal, the government went back and quietly edited their own indictment. Yes, they edited it. That allegation about Durk paying the bounty, gone, deleted, vanished like a tweet someone regrets. Between the first indictment and the second one, the Durk paid for the hit claim simply evaporated. Durk's defense team seized that change immediately and essentially pointed to the court, like, Your Honor. They removed it because their own witness can't keep his story straight. The online reaction was instant chaos. Half the internet started celebrating like Durk was already walking out the courtroom with a victory parade. The other half said, slow down. This is the feds. They don't lose easily. And sitting in the middle of the storm was a mountain of legal jargon that actually meant something very simple. Either the witness is lying, or the government doesn't want the court to look too closely at what he said. Durk's lawyers didn't just point out the inconsistencies, they used them as ammunition. They argued that the case against him is built on vague accusations, missing details, and unreliable testimony. They highlighted how PW1's recollection shifts depending on the day, the mood, and the government's pressure level. They said it's fundamentally unfair for Durk to prepare a defense when the supposed facts keep jumping around like a rabbit on caffeine. And then the filings went deeper. Page after page, they laid out how PW1's statements evolved over multiple sessions. In one meeting, he denies the bounty. In another, he claims someone stayed behind to collect it. In a different one, he suggests a completely new chain of events. It felt less like testimony and more like improv. Theater with federal consequences. But the most fascinating twist wasn't in PW1's words. It was in the prosecution's reaction. Instead of defending the bounty allegation, they removed it from the indictment entirely. They didn't announce it. They didn't explain it. They didn't justify it. They simply acted like that allegation never existed. And Durk's legal team wasted zero time exposing that move to them. The sudden disappearance of the bounty claim wasn't a coincidence. It was a sign the government knew the allegation was shaky. A sign the witness had been unreliable. A sign that maybe this entire piece of the narrative was built on sand. But here's where things get even more intense. Durk's lawyers didn't file this motion just to complain. They filed it to force the government into a corner. They demanded the prosecution either dismiss the entire indictment for being too vague, or provide specific details about what exactly Durk is accused of doing. What was the bounty? When was it offered? Where did it happen? How much money? What was said? Who was present? What instructions were given? Durk's legal team asked every question the government hoped no one would ask. It was a direct challenge, a legal dare, a courtroom version of either show your cards or fold. This wasn't casual. This wasn't sloppy. This was calculated warfare. Because here's the truth. The government can't answer these questions with precision, not guesses. Not vibes, not assumptions. Then the murder-for-hire accusation falls apart like a cheap prop under stage lighting. They need exact details. Not generalities, dates, locations, messages, witnesses, evidence that can survive. Cross-examination instead of collapsing the moment someone applies pressure. The defense was essentially saying, if your own witness can't get the story right and you can't fill in the gaps, then this case shouldn't even go to trial. But that's not the only angle at play. Because while the defense is poking holes in the story, the prosecution has its own strategy. They've argued that giving too many details could endanger witnesses. They've hinted that providing specifics could compromise informants. They've suggested that some evidence is sensitive, and that revealing it too soon could put people at risk. That's their justification. But Durk's lawyers aren't buying it. They accuse the government of hiding behind confidentiality to cover the fact that their own narrative is inconsistent, and the fans. They're split right down the middle. Some people think Durk is about to walk away from this case with the government tripping over its own evidence. Others think this motion is a desperate attempt to force the prosecution's hand before they drop something even bigger. But the true cliffhanger was this. What happens when this witness, this shaky, inconsistent, story-flipping witness, has to sit in front of a judge and face the man whose freedom hangs on every word? Because once those two are in the same room, every contradiction becomes a weapon. Every inconsistency becomes a weakness. Every missing detail becomes a question, and Lil Durk's legal team is more than ready to ask those questions. The moment the paperwork leaked, the internet turned into a crime lab. People weren't just commenting. They were conducting digital autopsies on every word PW1 ever said. Suddenly, everyone online became a legal expert with a PhD in He's Lying 101. Reddit threads multiplied like rabbits. TikTok lawyers came out of hibernation. Instagram detectives were drawing arrows on screenshots like they were trying to solve the Zodiac case. The memes alone could have been submitted as evidence. One of the first memes to go viral showed PW1 flipping through different versions of his story like he was swiping on Tinder. Another meme had Durk sitting in court with sunglasses on, looking at PW1 like, "Which version are you performing today?" People were comparing his inconsistencies to Shaggy singing "It Wasn't Me," except this witness wasn't even trying to rhyme. Every time someone asked for clarity, his answers changed like the final season of a rushed TV show. But the twist that set the internet on fire was this sudden realization. If the feds removed the bounty allegation, what else were they willing to adjust? People began digging through old filings and comparing them line by line, like they were decoding ancient prophecies. Fans noticed entire phrases missing, sentences rearranged, sections rewritten. It was like watching someone edit a Wikipedia article at 3 a.m. during a mental breakdown. Nothing matched anymore. Then the celebrity reactions rolled in. Rappers, commentators, and industry insiders all had something to say. Some laughed at the defense, exposing the inconsistencies. Others warned that the feds don't play about murder for higher accusations. One influencer said, "The feds don't lose. They just reload." Another joked, "If this witness can't remember his story, how is he going to remember the oath?" The hip-hop community was having a field day, treating the situation like an unscripted season finale. Meanwhile, Durk's supporters were claiming victory. They flooded timelines with celebratory GIFs, acting like the judge had already dropped the gavel and said, "Case dismissed." Others weren't so confident. They reminded people that the federal government has a habit of staying quiet until they hit you with documents thicker than a Harry Potter novel. Still, the drama kept escalating like someone accidentally turned the dial to maximum chaos. The most fascinating shift came from the neutral crowd. The people who weren't pro-Durk or anti-Durk. They were simply glued to the storyline because it made every other court case look boring. These fans were dissecting the legal language like scholars. One person posted the government quietly removing allegations. "Oh, this is getting spicy." Another said, "This witness is changing stories more than my ex changes excuses." It was entertainment, outrage, and confusion all rolled into one. But the real shock came when analysts pointed out something nearly everyone else missed. When PW1 changed his story, the government didn't correct him publicly. They didn't confront him. They didn't clarify. They simply removed the claim from the indictment, as if the allegation had never been there. That silence sent the internet into conspiracy overdrive. People started theorizing that the prosecution knew the witness was unreliable, but kept him anyway because they needed his testimony to fill in gaps. Then TikTok creators jumped into the ring. They posted dramatic edits with ominous music, pointing to how PW1 said no bounty. Then there was a bounty, then someone stayed in, let to collect it. One creator even reenacted his testimony using different hats for each version of the story. Another person joked, "PW1 got more plot changes than a Tyler Perry script." The jokes wrote themselves. But beneath the humor was a growing sense of doubt. Even bloggers who usually defend the government's position started raising eyebrows. They questioned why the prosecution seemed hesitant to provide details. They wondered why such a major piece of the puzzle disappeared without explanation. One commentator said if the bounty allegation was real, they wouldn't remove it. They doubled down on it. That comment alone generated tens of thousands of reposts. And let's not forget the analysts who went full investigative mode. They compared Durk's filing to previous RICO cases and noticed a pattern. Whenever a witness changed stories too often, the prosecution would quietly pivot and rely on different evidence. That made people wonder if PW1's credibility was crumbling behind the scenes, forcing the government to rework their narrative before trial. It was speculation, but the timing raised valid questions. But the internet didn't stop there. Oh no, they escalated the drama by reviving old interviews. Fans pulled up clips of PW1 sounding unsure, rambling, or backtracking. They paired those clips with captions like "This didn't age well" and "Plot twist. He forgot his lines." Every inconsistency became a punchline. Every shift in his story became a meme template. Yet underneath the entertainment is a serious question echoing across platforms. If the star witness keeps changing his testimony, how strong is the government's case really? Lawyers online pointed out that credibility is everything in court. One attorney said, "A witness with multiple conflicting statements is a defense attorney's dream." Another added, "This gives Durk's team a wide-open lane to attack the foundation of the case." Meanwhile, the prosecution stayed silent. Not a word. Not a clarification. Not a correction. They treated the situation like a fire they planned to put out later. And fans started predicting two possible outcomes. Either the government would clap back with airtight evidence, or they'd double down on witness testimony that was now riddled with inconsistencies. Durk's legal team didn't wait around. They used the public confusion like fuel. Their motion called the indictment vague, inconsistent, and fundamentally unfair. They argued that it's impossible to defend against changing allegations. They pointed out that the government's silence was suspicious. They pushed the idea that the case was cracking under the weight of its own contradictions. The result? Public sentiment shifted again. More people began wondering if Durk was being overcharged. Some argued that if the prosecution had real evidence, they wouldn't rely so heavily on a witness who couldn't memorize a single timeline. Others countered that this motion was a strategic distraction, a way to stall, confuse, and pressure the government into revealing more evidence before trial. But the biggest reaction came when people imagined the moment PW1 actually has to sit in that courtroom and face Durk. Fans said the tension alone could power an entire season of Law and Order. One person tweeted, "PW1 gonna be sweating like he forgot his homework." Another said, "Durk staring at him is gonna unlock a whole new version of his story." These jokes spread like wildfire, but they highlighted a deeper truth. This confrontation could make or break the case, as the internet debated. Analyzed and argued, one thing became undeniable. The storyline wasn't getting simpler. It was getting bigger, darker, and more unpredictable. Durk's team had thrown the legal equivalent of a bomb into the middle of the courtroom. And now everyone, fans, critics, prosecutors, and even the witness had to brace for the fallout. Because once the prosecution responds, everything changes. When the smoke finally began to clear, the fallout from these documents wasn't just heavy, it was seismic. The shockwaves hit every corner of the hip-hop world, the legal world, and the fan world. Suddenly, the Lil Durk case wasn't simply a RICO storyline anymore. It had transformed into a high-stakes battle where credibility, strategy, and timing all collided in one brutal collision. And at the center of this chaos stood one fragile figure, PW1, the witness whose testimony now looked like a collapsing card tower. The first major consequence was reputational. PW1 wasn't just discredited online, he was dismantled. Every inconsistency, every timeline shift, every contradiction was replayed so many times that even people who didn't follow hip-hop news knew. The man's story didn't line up. He became a walking punchline, a living meme, an example in law classes of how not to deliver testimony. Once the public labels you unreliable, it's nearly impossible to recover, and PW1 was discovering that the hard way. Meanwhile, Lil Durk's image entered a strange new era. For months, many people insisted he was cooked, overdone, rotisserie ready, and legally doomed. But after this filing, the tone shifted. Even critics, the ones who never hesitated to drag him, began acknowledging that the case wasn't as ironclad as previously portrayed. Suddenly, Durk wasn't the villain in the narrative. He was a defendant facing a prosecution with missing puzzle pieces. People started viewing him less as a mastermind and more as someone possibly caught in a tangled web of speculation and assumptions. But not everything shifted in Durk's favor. The uncertainty wasn't a full victory, it was a cliffhanger. Because while the defense exposed weaknesses in the case, the prosecution remained quiet. Silent, strategic, and silence from the feds is never casual. Their lack of response didn't mean weakness. It meant preparation. They were planning their next move, and everyone knew when they came back. They wouldn't come lightly. That looming response created a new tension in the industry. Rappers who were ready to celebrate had to hold back. Commentators who predicted Durk's downfall had to reconsider. The entire hip-hop community found itself sitting in anticipation, waiting for the government's next chess piece to slide across the board. And then came the next. Major impact, career consequences. Every time Durk's name trended, brands hesitated. Streaming playlists stopped pushing his music as aggressively. Collaborators grew cautious about releasing joint tracks. It wasn't fair, but that's how the industry operates. The cloud of a federal case makes people nervous no matter what the new filings say. Labels think in terms of risk. Companies think in terms of headlines. And Durk, despite the surge of public sympathy, wasn't facing a clean slate yet. But what about the street perception? That's a whole different battlefield. Among fans who follow the Chicago drill scene and the politics behind it, the narrative became more divided than ever. Some people said the paperwork proved Durk had been set up by unreliable sources and shaky informants. Others argued that even if PW1 was sloppy, that didn't necessarily mean Durk was innocent. Still others pointed out that the feds rarely file cases unless they believe they have something solid, something the public hasn't seen yet. That division created a storm of debates across YouTube, TikTok, and Twitter. Influencers analyzed every filing. Legal creators filmed hour-long breakdowns. Even mainstream news outlets began using phrases like credibility issues and significant inconsistencies when discussing the government's case. The narrative shifted from certainty to confusion, and confusion benefits the defense. Meanwhile, Durk's legal team gained momentum. Their filing didn't just highlight flaws. It sent a clear message. If you have evidence, show it. If you don't, admit it. It was bold, confrontational, and strategic. It put pressure on the prosecution without crossing legal boundaries. It created a public expectation that the government now had to meet, and the government hates being pressured. The next impact came from the simple fact that this saga now had global attention. Every blog, channel, and news outlet was waiting for what happened next. That kind of spotlight can change the atmosphere in a courtroom. Judges notice. Prosecutors notice. Jurors see headlines. The stakes rise. The pressure intensifies. The pressure intensifies. And every small legal movement becomes magnified. But the biggest consequence was psychological. PW1 wasn't just facing Durk's lawyers, he was facing the entire public eye. People began questioning his motives, his recollections, his ability to handle pressure, his mental state. Being a federal witness is already a burden, but being a federal witness whose story is falling apart in real time, that's a different level of stress. Any future confrontation in court, any cross-examination, Any face-to-face interaction with Durk becomes a potential meltdown. And then there was Durk himself. Publicly, he remained quiet. But behind the scenes, this development changed everything. It shifted how his team planned their defense. It opened new angles for attack. It strengthened their argument that the indictment lacked the specificity required for a legitimate trial. It boosted morale, even if temporarily, and created leverage for negotiations. Yet this wasn't a fairy tale moment where everything magically turned in Durk's favor. There was still danger. Serious danger. Because the very same filing that helped him could backfire spectacularly if the government responded with heavy evidence. Everyone knew it. Even fans celebrating online secretly knew it. This case wasn't over. It wasn't close to over. This was the calm before a storm that might be bigger than anything we've seen yet. Every comment section, every debate thread, every podcast episode ended the same way. It all depends on how the prosecution responds. And that response could go two ways. Either they come back with flimsy excuses that support Durk's narrative, or they return with detailed evidence that makes PW1's inconsistency irrelevant. The stakes couldn't be higher, and then came the final consequence, the future. Because regardless of how the prosecution responds, this moment changed the trajectory of the entire case. It forced the public to question what they thought they knew. It forced the media to reassess the storyline. It forced the prosecution to tighten their strategy. And it forced Durk's team into a position where they had to capitalize on the pressure they created. The truth is simple. This case isn't moving backward. It's accelerating, and the next chapter won't just reveal more facts, it will determine everything. Durk's freedom, PW1's credibility, the strength of the government's evidence, the direction of the drill scene, the future of one of hip-hop's biggest stars. We're standing on the edge of a cliff in this legal saga, looking down at a future filled with uncertainty, tension, and revelations waiting to surface. And when that main witness finally steps into the courtroom, lifts his eyes, and sees Lil Durk staring back at him, that will be the moment the entire world stops breathing. And if your heart is still beating after all that, congratulations, you survived another deep dive into the wild, unpredictable courtroom roller coaster known as the Lil Durk case. You're officially built different. But don't think for 1 second that this saga is slowing down. If anything, the next chapter is already in motion, lurking behind sealed documents and silent prosecutors, who are probably sharpening their next move as we speak. So before the next legal bombshell drops, do what real members of the Rap Truth community do. Smash that like button like it stole your chain, like it owes you back pay, like it tried to flip its testimony mid-sentence. Go crazy on it. If it breaks, good, it deserved it. Drop your thoughts in the comments too. I want to hear your hottest theories, your wildest predictions, your boldest takes. Do you think PW1 can survive cross-examination without melting into a puddle? Do you think the government is gearing up for a comeback? Do you think Durk will walk out victorious or walk into the next chapter with even higher stakes? Let it out. This is the place for it. And of course, hit that subscribe button before the next breaking update hits and you're the last one to know. This channel stays knee-deep in the chaos. The leaks, the scandals, the filings, the courtroom twists, the celebrity reactions, all the stuff the mainstream won't say out loud, but you know you want to hear. Stick around. Because here at the Rap Truth, the story never ends. The drama never sleeps. And the truth, it hits harder than a prosecutor with fresh paperwork. Stay locked in. The Rap Truth, signing out. Truth, signing out.